decisions about abortion. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent. Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the following senators be permitted to speak prior to the scheduled roll call vote. Myself for up to 15 minutes, Senator Blackburn for up to 10 minutes, Senator Tester for up to 5 minutes.
Without objection.
Mr. President, coming to the floor and listening to some of my colleagues talk about their concern for lack of access to contraception, and some have said we need to pass a bill codifying same-sex marriage when that is currently the law of the land by virtue of a Supreme Court decision, the Obergefell case. Reminds me of the old story about the little boy who cried wolf. He cried wolf when there wasn't any danger, and then once there was danger, people didn't come to his aid because they thought it was another phony crying wolf. I can understand how our colleagues, given inflation, given crime, given the broken borders, wanting to change the subject to something else. But that's all this is. This is mere posturing pre-November, pre-midterm elections. This isn't about changing the law, because the law already permits ready access to contraceptives. The law already permits same-sex marriage. And so this idea that we ought to spend scarce time here in the Congress, which we have in limited supply, reaffirming rights that already exist is a clear political narrative designed to divert the American people's attention from things that really are at risk. That is the paychecks of every American family because of inflation, because of failed energy policies. We know that the price of gasoline and diesel and fuel to fill up your car so you can go to work or send your take your child to school or summer camp. We know that our cities are on fire due to spiking crime waves connected to drugs that are coming across the southern border. And of course, we know that the southern border is completely open with a big red carpet and a welcome mat out for anybody who wants to come to the United States illegally. And the cartels that are rich and getting richer because of the flow of their human traffic are also getting rich because of the flow of illegal drugs that took the lives of 108,000 Americans last year alone. We know where those drugs are coming from and that the Biden administration is doing absolutely nothing to stop them. I would want to change the topic too. Mr. President, on a more positive note, the Senate approved funding earlier this morning to bolster domestic semiconductor manufacturing by a vote of 64 to 33. This funding will help kickstart the development of these microprocessors, these chips that go into everything from your cell phone to the F-35 to Javelin and Stinger missiles that we send to Ukraine to defend their country from Russian aggression. This funding will help kickstart a domestic production of these semiconductors in a way that will prevent a vulnerability of our supply chain, since 90% of those advanced semiconductors currently come from Asia, with 60% coming from Taiwan alone. One other benefit to this bill is that this bill could create roughly 185,000 jobs every year as these new facilities are constructed. Long term, it could bring another 280,000 jobs online. And once these foundries are operational, they will supply made-in-America semiconductors that can be used on everything from smartphones to cars to airplanes to missile defense systems. Semiconductors are the cornerstone of this legislation, but the bill also takes a range of other steps to help propel innovation in the competition we're currently in with the People's Republic of China. This bill makes allows investments, authorizes investments in research that will support everything from robotics to next generation wireless technology. It also authorizes NASA programs that will keep America at the forefront of space exploration. It extends the authorization for the International Space Station to 2030. This is very important, especially now that Russia has said it will end its commitment to the International Space Station after 2024. This bill also lays the groundwork for America's continued presence in space after 2030, including language I championed requiring NASA to develop a strategy to retire the International Space Station and transition to a successor platform. It also enhances existing programs that support future exploration missions. This includes the Moon to Mars program, which is leading efforts to get an American astronaut on the surface of Mars. Texas is a proud home to the Johnson Space Center, the home of human spaceflight, but also a range of other universities and companies that are leading the way in human space exploration. Enabling these partnerships saves money, drives innovation, and gives us a competitive edge over countries like Russia and China. The broader bill, including the CHIPS Act, will support both our economic and our national security and strengthen our efforts to lead the world in scientific innovation. The way we are going to compete with China and to beat them is to out-innovate them, because no country in the world has better human capital, better brains, and a better system to encourage innovation, which will keep us ahead of the People's Republic of China. They don't play by the rules. They certainly don't observe the rule of law. They steal all the technology they can get. But it's important for the United States to be in the game and not be left behind. I want to thank Senator Warner, the senior senator from Virginia, for launching this effort with me 2 years ago. We introduced the CHIPS for America Act in June of 2020, which demonstrates how long it takes to get important legislation passed here in the United States Congress. Since the time we introduced it, I've worked with our colleagues on both sides of the aisle to secure the necessary funding so we could deliver the benefits for our country. Countless colleagues have been part of the process over these last few weeks, particularly Senator Young, Senator Portman, Senator Wicker, Senator Sinema, and countless others, Senator Cantwell, certainly Senator Schumer as well, and numerous others have led the charge on this legislation. And their hard work and their willingness to work cooperatively together and to find common ground is the reason for our success. This has been a long, winding road with a lot of twists and turns along the way, but the end is finally in sight. Speaker Pelosi has promised to bring this legislation up for a vote in the House, and I hope our colleagues across the Capitol do not dally and get this bill voted out of the House and to the President's desk. Chip manufacturers are watching Congress and waiting to see if this bill passes before they decide where to build new fab manufacturing facilities. And we've been told that unless this bill passes, these hoped-for manufacturing jobs and these semiconductor manufacturing fabs will not be built here in America, but will be built in Europe and other places around the world. Secretary Raimondo, the Secretary of Commerce, has assured our colleagues that the United States will miss out on big benefits in terms of jobs, national security, and our economy if Congress doesn't pass this bill by the start of the August recess. Mr. President, once this bipartisan legislation passes the Senate, our Democratic colleagues are reportedly planning a dramatic pivot from bipartisanship to an ultra-partisan reconciliation process. Apparently, they're willing to work together when it's convenient, but they're also willing to abandon the notion of working together and are preparing to go on another reckless partisan spending spree. This isn't the first time At the start of last year, Democrats spent nearly $2 trillion in unnecessary spending on a party line basis. People wonder why we have 9% inflation. Part of it is our Democratic colleagues are willing to shovel money out the door and chase limited goods with supply chain problems, which mean that prices get driven higher and higher, as well as I mentioned, flawed energy policies that look for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia to increase production rather than to produce more American oil and gas here at home. Well, our Democratic colleagues succeeded in that $2 trillion bill, and they tried to pass another partisan bill at the end of the year, which would have cost the American people nearly $5 trillion. But thankfully, that entire effort failed. Now some of our colleagues are committed. This is our last chance before the August recess to take advantage of the rules of the Senate and to go on a partisan spending bonanza, and certainly they don't want to miss this opportunity. We're hearing that our colleagues are frantically piecing together a bill that has not yet even been written yet and completed and passed the so-called birdbath test with the Senate parliamentarian. And so we're waiting to see whether they can meet the time deadline of the end of next week or not. As I said, the bill is still reportedly being written, so we don't even have a good picture of everything that's in it. But we do have an understanding of the general framework, and it's not looking good for the American people. For example, our colleagues have said their proposal will implement government price controls on life-saving drugs, a move that will stifle innovation and end up with scarcity. That's what price controls always do. And then we've heard that they plan to expand and extend the Obamacare tax subsidies. This all started with a partisan spending bill that became law last year. It expanded the amount of taxpayer assistance people receive, which in short gave more money to more people, including lifting the cap on individuals who could receive those subsidies above $400,000. Of course, at the time, the camel's nose under the tent was that it was designed as a temporary provision. But here we are, a year and a half later, and they're already trying to extend it, indicating that there was nothing temporary intended by it. They claim it's not a permanent extension and that it will only last 2 or 3 years, but I have no reason to believe that Democrats will give up on extending those provisions when they expire. In the words of Ronald Reagan, the closest thing to eternal life on earth is a government program. Once created, they will not die, even if they are no longer necessary. And of course, a permanent extension will cost the American people a lot of money. Last week, the Congressional Budget Office and the Joint Committee on Taxation released a report of the true cost of a permanent expansion. And it's pretty shocking for a number of reasons. First is the financial cost. By expanding the Obamacare premium tax credits and making them permanent, Democrats will add $248 billion to the federal deficit over the next decade. Mr. President, at my age and your age, we're not going to be the ones that have to pay that money back. But these young people sitting down here are going to have to pay the price for the profligate spending today. And all Americans will pay the price by adding fuel to the fire of inflation. For whatever reasons I really can't fathom, the federal debt and the national debt are of no concern to our Democratic colleagues. They simply don't seem to care. They act as though we're playing with monopoly money, that we can print and borrow like there is no tomorrow, because none of this really matters. But we know that's not true. Every dollar we spend is paid for by taxpayers, and every ounce of debt we accrue will be carried and repaid by our children and our grandchildren. But none of this seems to matter to our friends across the aisle. They're still plowing ahead with this legislation, and unfortunately, the irresponsible spending isn't even the worst part. Our colleagues claim this extension will allow more Americans to afford health care. But the Congressional Budget Office and the Joint Committee on Taxation told us that under this plan, some 2.3 million Americans will lose their current coverage provided by their employer. 2.3 million Americans will lose their coverage provided currently by their employer. Hardworking Americans whose health insurance is currently covered by their employers would be told, you're on your own now. And no matter what you negotiated, when you negotiated your salary with your employer, if you're a union member and subject to a collective bargaining agreement where your union negotiated a generous health care plan, all of that will be in jeopardy by this reckless expansion of the Obamacare subsidies. Our Democrat friends want to continue subsidizing health care for six-figure earners. People earning 750% of the federal poverty level would be eligible for taxpayer-funded subsidies. 750% of the poverty level, you'd get cash from Uncle Sam. Our country would be essentially paying wealthy people to lose their current employer-provided health care so they can end up on the government subsidy. This is simply crazy policy, driving up the deficit, kicking people off of their employer-provided health plans, forcing taxpayers to subsidize health insurance for the rich. This isn't about helping the uninsured. It's a backdoor way to implement Medicare for all. Yes, Joe Biden may be president, but it's the Bernie Sanders agenda at work here. Of course, Democrats couldn't get enough support for this radical plan, so they're trying to jam it through on party line votes. Instead of attempting to pass a massive, unpopular bill all at once, they're trying to serve it to the American people in spoonfuls. Bit by bit, they're trying to push America closer to a single-payer health system. American people do not want Medicare for all. People who have their employer-provided coverage want to keep it. And the American people don't want the federal government subsidizing wealthy people who can afford to pay for their own health care. Mr. President, this is a bad idea that I hope whose time has not come. And I hope our friends on the other side of the aisle will simply give up